Let's talk about how minor intervals work. So we have all these things that we've done with major intervals here. Minor intervals are very closely related to major intervals. The same numbers that can be used for major intervals can also be used for minor intervals. So 2, 3, 6, and 7 can be major intervals. Those can also be minor. The way we're going to find minor intervals is not by thinking of a minor scale. That's how we think about major intervals. We associate them with the tonic note of a major scale. But for minor intervals, we're going to associate our minor intervals with the major intervals that we write. So I'll show you what I mean. Minor intervals are always 1/2 step smaller than a major interval. So if you think about it, I always like to do it, I kind of like think about it like this, like with my hands or my fingers in some ways. If this is how big an interval is between my two fingers, if this is a major third and I want to get a minor third, I have to make this interval smaller. I have to make the space between those two notes smaller. So I can do that by moving the top note down. Or I can do that by moving the bottom note up by 1/2 step. So any of these major intervals, I could create minor intervals from them by moving the top note down 1/2 step or the bottom note up 1/2 step. Either way, whatever makes the interval smaller. Now, in some situations, you won't be able to change one of the notes, so you have to know how to be able to change either note to make it work. So let's go ahead and take some of these examples. Let's look here at our major third. Let's say that I have a C for my bottom note. And I'm asked to write a minor third above it. Okay, so I'm going to start by step number 1. I'm going to write a third. I know how to do that, no problems. So a third above C is C, D, E. That's 3. And then I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say, what would a major third be? So I'm going to like temporarily cover that up. Okay, a major third means that the top note is in the major scale of the bottom note. So is E in the major scale of C? Yes. Yes, it is. Okay, good. So what I have right now is a major third. I want it to be a minor third, and I'm not going to change the C. So what can I do to the E to make this a minor third? Remember the hands, right? The fingers. So I've got a major third right now. I need it to be a minor, which means it needs to be 1/2 step smaller. So I need to bring the top note down by 1/2 step. I can do that with a flat. And just like that, I have a minor third between C and E flat. It's still a third because it's still some kind of C and some kind of E, but now it's minor because it's a 1/2 step smaller than the major third was. We can do the same thing with our minor seventh that we have over here. If I want to draw a minor seventh, I'll start by just writing a seventh above, which is B to A. So then I'm going to say, what would a major seventh be? Well, like I just figured out before, a major seventh is going to have an A sharp in it because A sharp is in the major scale of B. So I'm going to off to the side do a little extra work. This is where I'm going to put my answer, so I'm going to do my work to the side, kind of like math. Only not as crazy. Some of you math nerds might actually disagree with me there, and that is cool. I actually like math, so. All right, so anyway, if I have a major seventh, it's going to go up to an A sharp. But I want this to be a 1/2 step smaller, and I can't change the B because that was my given note. So what do I do to make this interval a 1/2 step smaller? Well, I have B on the bottom, A sharp on the top. I need to bring the A sharp down a 1/2 step. What happens if you bring a note with a sharp down a 1/2 step? Well, you take the sharp off because the sharp made the A a 1/2 step higher, so we just want a regular natural A. There we go, that's my minor seventh. So I use the natural sign inside the parentheses just as a reminder to myself. But in the actual problem, I don't need to put the natural sign on it. I can just keep it as is because there's no sharp preceding it. So that right there is my minor seventh from B to A. So that's how you write minor intervals. You write the major interval first, and then you make it a half step smaller. I could also write a minor seventh if I started with the same major seventh here. I could also make this a half step smaller by raising the bottom note by a half step. Like, if I have this and I want it to be smaller, I could bring the bottom note up. So I could make this a minor seventh by making the B a B sharp. That is also a minor seventh, B sharp to A sharp. Now that one looks weird, I think. We're not used to seeing like a B sharp very much. It can happen, but it's not very common. And sometimes it's confusing because it feels like if you put a sharp on something, it feels like that would make it bigger because we're used to sharps raising things, which tends to indicate like more space underneath. But if you sharp a bottom note, it's not making it bigger. It's actually making it smaller. So it's important not to get confused about raising and lowering. It's not about notes going up or down. It's about intervals becoming bigger or smaller, expanding or contracting. So that's kind of what we're thinking of when we think of intervals. Now, identifying minor intervals can be a little bit trickier because you have to think through this process, but you also have to look at the notes that are given to you. So if you're looking at here, if you look up at this sixth, we determined it was a major sixth because the top note is in the major scale of the bottom note. But if the top note is not in the major scale of the bottom note, then we have to do a little more searching to figure it out. So, for example, if you were given this interval and asked to determine what kind of interval it was, first you would say it's a sixth. I can count up and determine the number. So that's step one. And then I have to figure out the quality. So my first question will be, is this major? Is D flat in the major scale of F? Well, no, it's not. There's no D flat in F major, so this is not a major sixth. But what would a major sixth be? Well, it would be to D natural. So then I'm going to say, is this interval a half step smaller than this major sixth? It's just kind of like using this as a reference guide. Is this a half step smaller? If it is, then it's a minor sixth. If it's not, then it's some other quality that we haven't talked about yet. Well, the F has remained the same. The D is down a half step from here, so that makes this interval smaller. So this is indeed a minor sixth. The same thing works for major and minor seconds, but kind of a quick way to remember major and minor seconds is a major second is a whole step, and a minor second is a half step. So that's kind of a quicker way to determine that without going through the whole process. Now, because they're seconds, they always have to involve two different letter names that are a step apart. So you can't have like a G and a G sharp are a half step apart, but because they're both G's, you can't call that a second. That would be some kind of one interval. So you have to make sure that it's actually a two interval. It's actually a second. But then from there, a whole step is a major second and a half step is a minor second. And you could go through this process with it to see how that works, to prove that that is true. But that's kind of how that works. So just remember, major and minor intervals can only be seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths. The other intervals can never be major and they can never be minor. If you have a major interval, the top note is in the major scale of the bottom note, And if you have a minor interval, it's just like a major interval except 1/2 step smaller, either by bringing the top note down, like we did here, or by bringing the bottom note up, like we did here. Alright, so that's all you need to know for major and minor intervals. Next, we're going to talk about other qualities, so you can look forward to that. I will talk to you soon.